Oh god, I wish someone told me about F.E.A.R 2 before I played it. I wish I knew that it was pretty much entirely unplayable on PC nowadays. Be it performance problems or your mouse just not working or the game not launching. This game has a myriad of problems, and I, in the end, only managed to fix a few of them, and most of the times they would unfix themselves and then refix themselves at random. And I need to go over this before I even start the formal review. This game is extremely hard to get working, especially if you're playing a monitor above 60Hz. This game is not designed for it. It is possible to get it working, but only using outdated software that I couldn't even find a link for. This guy seemingly got it to work, so who knows, maybe your mileage will be much better than mine is. Who knows. My solution, on the other hand, was to lock the game to 60Hz, and that didn't work for me, so I changed my monitor's refresh rate to 60Hz, turned on VSync because the game cannot go above 60 or everything just stops working. And chances are, even when you've got that fixed, you will still have this game's bullshit insane mouse sensitivity. And I think what is the first case I've ever seen of a mouse dead zone on a PC game. There's a fix for both of those issues, if it affects you, because some people got it, some people didn't. So don't preemptively install the fix. Play the game, find your problems, fix the problems once you know what they are. I got it, but only sometimes, and it would change its location, so to speak. Sometimes it was really close to the center of the mouse, while other times it was at the far edges. It just really makes aiming and just looking around really inconsistent, and really puts a damper on what this game actually does well. And, for fuck's sakes, change the FOV. Because, again, it's so fucking small and unusable. It's like maybe a 60-degree field of view. It's horrible. I managed to get it to what I assume is about 110, which is, for me anyway, far more usable than 60 degrees of field of view. And even when you get through all that, you'll still be subject to a game that, because of the 60 FPS lock and VSync, cannot run at a smooth 60 FPS even on powerful hardware. For reference, I am using a 9th Gen i5 and a 3070, and I still cannot get a solid 60 FPS. So yeah, welcome to F.E.A.R 2. F.E.A.R 2 is the sequel to F.E.A.R 1, obviously. F.E.A.R 1 was an extremely well-liked game when it came out, like, really liked. And this is the sequel. And I'll be blunt here, this is not a good game. It's not bad, it's probably average, like a 5 out of 10, 6 out of 10. It has a lot of problems, but also a lot of charm, and a decent amount that I actually really like about it. But let's be clear, this game is kind of weird at times. It has some strange creative choices. The game's premise is a little bit more involved than the original as well. You play as Michael Beckett, a Delta Force operator who along with his team is sent to bring Genevieve Aristotide into protective custody. But when you arrive at her penthouse complex, it becomes very apparent that you aren't the only people who want her. What follows is a roughly 6 to 8 hour game depending on how you play, that digs further into the lore of F.E.A.R and far more into Alma's lore in both a narrative and a gameplay sense. It's fairly obvious to see that this game is not visually all that similar to F.E.A.R 1. It's different. Some would even say upgraded, but I won't be saying that, because to put it bluntly, this game is both an upgrade and a fairly major downgrade from F.E.A.R 1. What I think is most notably missing is the exaggerated lighting that F.E.A.R 1 had. It's been toned down a lot here. More effort is placed onto building atmosphere through props, textures and audio, which isn't a bad thing, but for someone who has a serious hard-on for lighting, it is really sad to see the lovely lighting from F.E.A.R absent. And it's important to note here that it's only gone mostly. Some objects still rattle around when shot and throw this glorious light everywhere, but they're few and far between. But in exchange for the missing lighting, the world is way more detailed now, which is great. What F.E.A.R lacked was clutter. This game is very messy, if that makes sense. Like, but F.E.A.R 1 wasn't. It was very clean. There wasn't really debris and just shit everywhere. But F.E.A.R 2 has that, which makes sense, as F.E.A.R 2 takes place post-Alma waking up, so everything is kind of just post-apocalyptic now. A large amount of the game is sent outside in the destroyed streets, which allows me to show you the skybox, which I think looks really good. I actually really like it. I think it's actually really good looking. And being outside also shows you more of the increased scale of F.E.A.R 2. We don't fight on a good 10 meters square street now. We fight in entire city blocks with windows enemies hide in. It's actually like a really big upgrade in terms of fidelity. Interior locations also look a lot more like F.E.A.R 1 than the outside ones do. We get that masterfully well done lighting that showcases where enemies are, and, of course, Alma sometimes. It's a step or two above what F.E.A.R 1 did, which is good, but this is only for some interior areas. I would say the majority are still flat looking in terms of lighting. Effects are another area that to me is iffy. It's both good and bad, if that makes sense. In my F.E.A.R 1 review, I really praised the particle effects and how immersive they were, how they added kineticism to the combat. But I just can't do that here. And the reason is that they simply just aren't as good or as immersive as F.E.A.R 1's. They appear to trigger weirdly. Like, shooting an enemy 3 times triggers blood, but shooting them once doesn't. You don't really get those plumes of smoke and debris in the air anymore either, which sucks. It really did help in establishing the stakes of a firefight, and, well, it's missing here. But talking more so about what's missing, let's talk about gameplay. What's good, bad, or simply different from F.E.A.R 1. The most egregious change for me is the aiming. You know, aside from the mouse acceleration, the dead zone, really weird mouse sensitivity, all that crap. In F.E.A.R 1, when you ADS'd, you were hip firing, but it just got more accurate and you zoomed in a little bit, right? It allowed you to survey the area, to see where enemies were, but most importantly, let you see the particle effects. It was immersive. And I think to simply put it, F.E.A.R 2 modernized itself. You can now ADS properly, and it looks like shit most of the time, frankly. For example, the sight on the SMG has this weird texture that shows up sometimes, and it makes it pretty much nigh impossible to see if you're actually hitting something. So, thank God for the stupid hit markers that completely take you out of the game. See, the F.E.A.R 2 devs thought of a solution for every problem. And on this trend of modernization, a lot has changed because of that. F.E.A.R 2 came out 3 years after F.E.A.R 1, and a lot of stuff happened between these two releases. Namely, the birth of what I like to call the 7th generation console shooter. And this is what F.E.A.R 2 is. It is a console shooter. Which for some is like a badge of shame, but for me I see it as more of a trend in gaming, which you kind of just have to follow if you want to make money. So, fair enough. I mean, look at the HUD, for example. Like, why? It's this weird, futuristic heads-up display. I hate this shit. It doesn't need to look like this. The original HUD was great, and it didn't fuck around your peripheral vision like this one does. This shit was so common in 7th generation shooters. And of course, I would be horribly shit at reviews if I didn't mention at least briefly the stupid enemy designs. I mean, okay, so like, they just look like nondescript space army men with LEDs strapped to them. It's super, super uninventive and makes no sense when this game is meant to be set in the hours before and after F.E.A.R 1's conclusion. But moving on to the actual gameplay flow and whatnot. The gameplay is built around a series of rooms where enemies spawn on one side and rush at you. You just have to shoot them, open a door, enter the next room. This is what the majority of this game is. And, to be fair, this is what a majority of first-person shooters are. So this isn't even necessarily a complaint, or even a misgrievance, or anything. This is more so just me telling you, this is what the game is. This is the flow of the gameplay. This is what your, internal objectives are when playing this game. And thankfully, It's not cover-based, thank God. I was kind of expecting it to be, as a 7th generation console shooter, to be cover-based. But it's not. But I think it was meant to be in development, because there's this fucking really weird thing where you can walk up to specific props in the world and flip them for cover. It's really weird. Like, there's tables you can flip, desks, medical table things. Like, it's a weird feature that doesn't make any sense. So I never used it because, frankly, your health regenerates so quickly that you don't need to take cover. The arsenal in F.E.A.R 2 has 12 different weapons, some which are just different variations of weapon archetypes. For example, there's 2 shotguns, both a pump action and an automatic, both of which I think are pretty similar in terms of like reload speed, damage, range, so I don't necessarily see the point in choosing between them. And on the note of shotguns, they have been severely weakened in comparison to the original F.E.A.R, which does kind of make sense when you consider just how overpowered they were, but also they're shotguns. They should be powerful. Their only downside should be range and reload speed. But in F.E.A.R 2, they're borderline useless, with most enemies taking multiple rounds at point blank range to kill. And this kind of just holds true for nearly every weapon in F.E.A.R 2, they all just kind of feel like shit. And maybe it's because I'm spoiled by games that feel good, but the guns just don't sell me on the impact. The different characteristics of each weapon are very important in constructing how a player approaches combat, and what weapons they like and which they don't. But in F.E.A.R 2 you don't really get a choice, because the game is really lax on the amount of ammo that it gives you, and since you can only hold 4 weapons, the ammo you do get is split between them. You kind of just have to stick with what the game gives you, which is normally an SMG, a rifle, a shotgun, and then a heavy weapon. But, of course, you aren't limited to those. You can always just carry around a weapon with no ammo on the off chance you find more, but I don't recommend it, as most enemies in this game are bullet sponges, and you will need every bullet you have to clear encounters. It's very common to nearly run out of ammo or to run out entirely, which isn't fun. The removal of instant kill headshots is a massive problem, which is only compounded by enemy health being so high, and of course, the terrible bullet spread, of which occurs even when aiming down sight and is even noticeable in the sniper rifle. And this really cements F.E.A.R 2 as a bog standard shooter. That is until you remember that Alma exists. And oh boy, Alma is beefed up in this game. Alma is now the antagonist, not a weird sideshow that happens sometimes. Alma is now a massive part of the gameplay, not just the narrative. But what do I mean by this? In F.E.A.R 1, Alma to me always felt like she was separate from everything else. Like, you would gun down some replicants and then Alma would show up for a split second. That was her purpose within the game. It was to break up combat with creepy shit. And to be fair, that is still ultimately what she is in F.E.A.R 2, but she's far more utilised now as a direct source of tension. There are multiple times where Alma will show up and attack you, grabbing at you. She still does her weird staring at you from across the room, but she's far more direct now. She's closer, and now you definitely see her. She doesn't just like evaporate anymore, she sticks around and she makes sure that you see her. Which is interesting, because it makes her a bit more creepy, in my opinion. In the original game, Alma would attack you using her, what I'm going to call Alma's creations, if that makes sense. The things that happen because of her. In F.E.A.R 1 we had what I called the shades, these like floating ghost things. But in F.E.A.R 2 the shades are replaced with what I'm going to call shimmers, because they shimmer. They're a really effective sequence and it looks great visually as well. The potential for a game over is elevated when you figure out they bypass your armor, meaning that you can die really fast if you don't manage to take them out, which is easy, they're a one shot, but they're kind of hard to see at times. The assassins from F.E.A.R 1 also return as well. They shoot the same purpose and function pretty much identically. They do have this cool effect now, but they also seem to be the base for a failed experiment that litters the game's first few stages. The Alma sequences specifically are really, really well done. They're great. A lot of them are not scary per se, they do help to broaden the narrative around Alma, however. As F.E.A.R 2 kind of sees her as a tragic evil, not an evil, He really wants you to know that Alma was subjected to horrible things and is a direct result of those things, not a cause. And on that note of things, I guess, the narrative of F.E.A.R 2, spoilers ahead. Well, F.E.A.R 2 begins in the final moments of F.E.A.R 1. We're pre-reactor exploding, but only just. Dark Signal, a weird name, the Delta Force squad said to bring Genevieve Aristide into protective custody are the main characters within this narrative, who plays Michael Beckett. The team split up when entering the building, each group sweeping different parts of the building, yada 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 yada. That shit doesn't really matter. What matters here are the characters within the squad, because they do actually have personalities, weirdly enough. The characters of importance within the squad are, because some of them are not important at all, Harold Keegan, Cedric Griffin, Kira Stokes. Kira in particular supports you directly throughout the game and is with you right until the end, and is also voiced by the same chick that does Cortana inside the Halo games, which really threw me for a minute or two when I played this, so fair enough. Continuing on, you do eventually find Aristide inside a hidden safe room. She tells about Project Harbinger, which is later revealed to be a program for developing the successor to Paxton Fettel, the powerful psychic from F.E.A.R 1. As you and her prepare to leave this penthouse room, evacuate to the parked APC outside, the point man from the end of F.E.A.R 1 detonates the reactor, releasing Alma, and that makes you black out. When you come to, you're being operated on by a bunch of doctors. You get this nightmare vision from Alma, and then you wake up. It seems to me that they were like enhancing your psychic abilities, which I guess is how this game explains the slow-mo mechanic, much like F.E.A.R 1. Turns out you're inside a hospital, which then turns out to be a small room housed in a massive underground base, which is then attacked by the same people who attacked you at the penthouse, Colonel Vanek. Beckett escapes with the help of Snake Fist, someone using a codename who obviously knows a lot about you and your team. It also appears that Alma's awakening has triggered the what were shut down replica troops to activate again. You get attacked by Alma. Snake Fist explains that she's trying to absorb you into her. She attacks you a couple more times on your trip to the surface. Once on the surface, you regroup what is left of your team, with many dying to Alma, which is an interesting little thing. A lot of those scenes are really, really cool. The most interesting of which being Cedric Griffin, or Tops, as he's lovingly referred to. He gets a full-blown cutscene, which is honestly really cool. I don't know if this is intentional, but it's really identical. I say identical, not really identical at all, but it's very similar to, I forget what his name was, Griffin? Oh my god, the name's Griffin. The guy in F.E.A.R Extraction Point, I think. The guy that gets ripped apart by the Shades. That's a weird one. Anyway, the rest of the team, which for reference, the rest of the team is Keegan, Morales, Stokes, and Beckett, all move to the Wade Elementary School to rescue Snakefist and Ristai from the approaching ATC forces. And that name might seem familiar to some of you, because Wade is Alma's last name. And I really hope that doesn't mean anything. And then you walk around for a bit and you realise, oh shit, it does mean something. The elementary school is filled with what I called shimmers before, like heaps of them. Shimmers and Almans there. You fight some shimmers and some, like, honestly, excellent looking sequences. And then the ATC arrives and it becomes a first-person generic action shooter again. You just keep on shooting them, you shoot them some more. Oh, some more arrive, you shoot them. And then Alma shows up, she pins you to a wall, and this is fucking really strange, decides to change how she looks. She becomes like more human looking and more sexually desirable is how I would describe it. Because this is what Alma is now. She's a representation of what society does to women, I guess. But no, really. In the narrative, she does this so Beckett wants to fuck her. That's the reason of this. That's the point. She found her mate. It's really gross, but it only gets grosser later, so don't get too comfortable. You find your way into yet another underground facility, you encounter Varric, and then you kill him in the QTZ, and then you meet Snakefist, who is apparently Terry Halford, an ATC researcher who helped develop the Vault, which is the cage for Alma. He then tells us that the only way to defeat Alma is to travel to Still Islands to a decommissioned armor chamber facility, where a device is housed that can amplify psychic power. The idea is that you will gain Alma powers, and then you can kill Alma. It's such a weird plan. But anyway, Halford is then killed by a replicant assassin for no reason. you and your team logically begin to head to Still Island. During a heated firefight that follows, Keegan wanders off, your task of finding and bringing him back. It does become fairly obvious that Keegan has fallen for Alma. And I mean fallen. He even pushes you out of a nightmare sequence. That's impressive. You eventually lose him, however, and you circle back to your team. You'll head to Still Island, fight some replicants, enter the amplifier. Aristotide turns up and kills Cortana, Kira Stokes. Aristotide is then thrown back towards the firewall by Alma, kills her. You snap into a nightmare where you and Keegan fight each other. And then, whilst you're fighting Keegan inside like the dreamscape, the fight is overlaid with a video of Alma raping you. Because yes, Alma is raping you. And no, that's not some weird attempt at like 2016 cringe humor. Alma is raping you. What a weird fucking choice, honestly. You continue fighting Keegan whilst turning on the amplifier. You eventually finish turning it on, but not before Alma impregnates herself with your sperm, making a baby. The final scene in the game is Alma taking your hand and placing it on her already massive belly. A child is then heard saying "mummy," and then the game ends. First of all, what the fuck? Second of all, why the fuck? Because if you've watched my Rachel Foster video, you would know I don't really like it when rape is used as like shock value. But this game is a bit different in how it does it, because normally when games use rape, it's always a guy raping a girl, not a girl raping a guy. So it's a bit different. I'm not sure if I really like it at all, but the context is different. Like, you know, Alma in F.E.A.R 1. F.E.A.R 1 is ultimately a story about Alma losing two children, both of which weren't exactly born on her own terms. She was forcibly impregnated, so she was raped herself. Sure, there was no penis involved, but it was still forced artificial insemination, so I'm counting that one as rape, frankly. So in F.E.A.R 2, it does kind of make sense that she wants a child that's on her own terms. Those terms are fucked, but I guess points for her because it's on her own terms, I guess. I don't really know. I don't like Alma, I don't really get her, but I understand her motivation, I guess. It does make sense, is what I'm trying to say. Is it the best way to handle it? No. Especially considering how she like changes her appearance to suit Beckett. That's really weird. But that's base game F.E.A.R 2. We still have a DLC to cover. It's called Rebirth, and it's really short, but also really good. So I don't really have much to say about it. It clocks in at less than an hour if you don't die or sightsee, so it is really short, but it's an improvement, I feel, anyway, over the base game. It's more like F.E.A.R 1 than F.E.A.R 2, so the atmosphere overall, all 55 minutes of it, is far above what F.E.A.R 2 does. It feels oppressive but not dull. Combat feels really punchy as well. It had some excellent little sequences. My favourite of which is right at the beginning of the DLC, where you're escaping and an elite punches in through the wooden walls. It's really fucking neat. And yes, the story I'm going to talk about, because I think this is going to be relevant for F.E.A.R 3, because this DLC is basically what Extraction Point was. It's all about Paxton Fettel being reborn. You play as a replicant this time round. Again, this is a very interesting choice. Fettel reaches out to you and kind of turns you against your fellow replicas. This leads to them seeing you as defective because, frankly, you are. You're a clone soldier effectively shooting yourself, I guess? Anyway, you fight through some enemies, both ATC and replicas, until you reach the epicenter of the explosion, and then you release Fettel from his containment. Fettel then reveals that you are a perfect clone of him. He then gets absorbed into you, and now you are Paxton Fettel. Overall, it is a cool little DLC, and I think, most importantly, the AI is back. I didn't really talk about the AI at all when I was discussing F.E.A.R 2's base game, because it's frankly just very standard, like, it does the job. F.E.A.R 1's AI was very good. Not groundbreaking, but it's like top 20 for sure. Like, they called out where you were, they did all sorts of stuff, and I'm glad to say that I think that AI is back in Rebirth. At least the callouts are. And considering that you can't buy this DLC separately, you can only buy it in the form of the F.E.A.R collection on Steam. you might as well just give it a go. It's at most an hour of gameplay, and is actually, honestly, a really nice way to round off F.E.A.R 2, before indeed I and you hop into F.E.A.R 3. Because overall, F.E.A.R 2 isn't honestly a decent sequel to a game that many people love. It's not groundbreaking or really all that inventive, but what it is mostly enjoyable, which honestly is a trophy that not many games get these days. Minus a few technical hiccups which are relatively simple to fix, the game isn't bad. It has some great ideas and some really enjoyable moments. It's fun, and that's really all that matters, because no matter how much I harp on about shitty effects or whatever, if a game is fun, most of that simply doesn't matter. And F.E.A.R 2 is fun, it's enjoyable. But what it's not is F.E.A.R 1, and that was really my biggest problem with it. I think if I was to sum up F.E.A.R 2, the gameplay is a downgrade, but atmosphere, narrative, writing, and graphics are leaps improved. So that's great. If you own it, I won't say that you're necessarily doing yourself a disservice by not playing it, as it isn't really all that impressive. It's fairly average, but I will say you are definitely missing out on one of the best school sections in a shooter horror game. Like, maybe minus Dead Space 2. So on that note, I will hopefully catch you soon for the final chapter of F.E.A.R, which I know that it's a co-op shooter with cover-based mechanics, so I'm excited. I have some, I don't know, I hope it's good, I really do.